Welcome back to Future Founders Lab, ready for another deep dive. Today, it's all about product development and innovation. You know, that little thing that makes or breaks a business?
Little thing, huge thing, really.
Huge thing, yeah. And we've got some heavy hitters to help us out. Inspired, Sprint, and the Lean Startup.
3 whole books. Might seem like a lot.
I know, right? But trust me, we're distilling it down so you can spend less time reading and more time, well, building that amazing product.
And less time building the wrong product, which, unfortunately,
It happens a lot, huh?
oh, way more than you'd think. Inspired really hits you at that fact. So many product efforts just fail.
Not for lack of trying, though, so what's going on?
Well, Inspired points out this common trap, and I've seen it myself. Companies get stuck in what they call project management.
Project management, okay.
Instead of real product management, it's like they're focused on checking boxes.
Hitting deadlines, churning out features.
Yeah, all that. But are they solving real problems for customers? Often. Not even close.
So it's about more than just building stuff.
Way more. Inspired, and even the lean startup hammer this in. It's the difference between outputs and outcomes.
Outputs versus outcomes, got it.
It's not about how many features you ship, it's about the impact of those features.
So instead of saying, we're going to build a messaging app with video chat,
You got to figure out why anyone would choose your app. What problem are you solving that no one else is?
makes sense. The Lean Startup uses the example of IMVU, that avatar chat platform, right?
Yeah. They thought people would use it with existing friends. Turned out, users were way more into making new friends, something avatars really enhanced.
So even if you think you know your market, you got to be ready for those surprises.
Big time. It's all about continuous learning, building a learning machine around your product.
Which is where I think Sprint comes in with a super practical framework. Tell me if I'm wrong, but it's basically a 5-day process to test ideas.
Before you go all in on development,
Exactly. So instead of months building something we hope people want.
you test those core assumptions quickly, cheaply. Sprint calls it de-risking your product development.
And they've got some pretty cool examples, right? I remember that Blue Bottle Coffee case study.
Yeah. Even though their main thing is physical cafes, they used a sprint to figure out their online store. Proves it's not just for tech companies.
I like that. Makes it feel less intimidating. Sprint also talks about this decider role, right?
Super important, especially for entrepreneurs. Someone needs to make those tough calls during the process. No more endless debates.
Gotcha. So now let's talk prototyping. I always thought that meant like a super polished thing.
Not at all. Sprint emphasizes that prototypes just need to be good enough to test your core assumptions. No need for perfection.
That's a relief. What kind of tools do they recommend?
Prepare to be amazed. Keynote.
Keynote, the presentation software.
Yep. Surprisingly powerful for making realistic mock-ups, and most people already have it. Inspired mentions other types too, like feasibility prototypes for engineers.
So you're bringing your tech folks in early, not just when it's time to code.
Exactly. Get that technical expertise involved in the discovery phase can lead to some really creative solutions.
It's like, hey, we're all in this together.
Exactly. And speaking of feedback, Inspired digs deeper than just, can people use this?
They call it qualitative value testing, right?
That's it. It's about understanding why customers respond a certain way, not just whether they can click the right buttons.
So how do you get at those deeper motivations?
Inspired suggests those good old in-depth interviews. Really observe how people are using your product.
Like you're a detective figuring out the clues.
In a way, yeah. And they use this great Fixstar example. They used Keynote prototypes to test different ways of explaining their fitness app, and eventually found what really resonated.
So it's a process of testing, learning, refining. Sounds like we've got a lot more to uncover in this deep dive.
Oh, we're just getting started.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back after a short break.
Lots to explore. And one thing that really stood out to me, especially in Inspired, is the whole company culture aspect.
Oh, yeah, they really hammer that home, don't they? Like, it's not just about the product itself, it's the environment where it's built.
It's like that saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
But seriously, they make a strong case for how company culture is intertwined with innovation.
Totally. It's about creating a space where people feel safe to share ideas, to experiment, to even,
Fail.
yeah, without feeling like they'll be punished for it.
Okay.
Inspired really contrasts these good team cultures with The bad ones.
where everyone's walking on eggshells.
Exactly. And they share this great story about Camille Hurst, who had to scale customer service at a big company.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
She basically empowered her team to share their learnings openly, and it led to all these improvements in their processes.
So it's not just about individual learning, it's about baking that learning into the company DNA.
Exactly, which kind of brings us back to the lean startup and the whole validated learning thing.
Right, like it's all connected in the end. You know, one thing I've always been curious about is that concept of innovation accounting. Oh, yeah, that's a good one, especially for those early stage companies.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those buzzwords that gets thrown around a lot, but I'm not always sure what it means in practice.
I hear you. So in a nutshell, it's about measuring progress in a way that focuses on learning and improvement.
So not just vanity metrics like how many website hits did we get?
That's right. It's more about, are we actually validating our assumptions? Are we moving the needle on the metrics that matter?
Like, are people signing up for our service? Are they using the key features? Are they sticking around?
Exactly. It's about looking at the data that tells you if you're actually making progress towards your goals. And the lean startup really emphasizes that this shift to validated learning can be kind of uncomfortable at first.
Why is that? Why would focusing on data and customer feedback feel worse?
Because the problems of the old way of doing things, like building the wrong product, are often kind of hidden.
They're like these invisible costs.
Exactly. But with validated learning, the problems are much more in your face. It can feel messy, like you're moving slower, even though you're actually learning faster.
So it's about trusting the process, even when it feels counterintuitive.
Absolutely. And the lean startup gives some great advice for managing that transition, setting clear expectations with your team, using root cause analysis to figure out what's going wrong.
So it's not just about experimenting, it's about learning from those experiments and making your process better.
You got it. And that's where tools and techniques from Sprint can be really helpful, especially for those quick experiments.
Yeah, I love how they make it so approachable. Like using Keynote for prototyping. You don't need to be a design whiz or have a ton of money to get started.
Totally. And going back to Inspired, remember how important it is to involve your engineers throughout the process, not just when it's time to build.
Right. Get them involved in the discovery phase, let them contribute their expertise.
It can lead to some really unexpected, innovative solutions. And, it just creates a much more collaborative, team-oriented atmosphere.
Which is what you want, ultimately.
Absolutely. And speaking of collaboration, we can't forget about the customers. Sprint dedicates a whole day to user testing, and they have a very specific way of doing it.
What's their secret sauce? Why is their user testing so effective?
Well, they start by being very intentional about who they test with. They find 5 people who truly represent their target market.
So you're not just grabbing random people off the street?
Nope. It's about getting feedback from the people who are most likely to use and love your product, and then they use a prototype, something tangible, to simulate the actual experience.
So it's not just hypothetical, it's like a sneak peek into what the product could be.
Exactly. And during the testing sessions, they ask open-ended questions, really listening to what the users have to say, even if it's not what they want to hear.
It's about getting to the truth, even if it's uncomfortable, and then using that feedback to make the product better, right?
Exactly. It's a continuous loop of testing, learning, and refining. And that's what leads to those truly successful products, the ones that solve real problems and delight their users.
And I think that's a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's still more to explore in this deep dive. I can see how understanding that deeper why can help build those amazing products. But honestly, sometimes I just feel overwhelmed by the possibilities. Like, where do you even start?
Oh, I feel that. You've got this grand vision. You want to change the world.
Exactly. And it's tempting to try to solve every problem at once.
It's like too many ideas, not enough time.
Totally. Both Inspired and the Lean Startup talk about this, though.
Yeah.
Focusing your efforts, especially early on.
Inspired calls it the single target market technique. Pick one customer group and really nail their needs.
Even if it means ignoring other potential customers for now.
For now, yeah. It's about becoming the absolute best solution for that niche. Then you can think about expanding.
It's like that saying, a jack of all trades is a master of none.
Exactly. The Lean Startup tells us a great story about Food on the Table, that meal planning service.
I vaguely remember that one. Remind me.
So they started by focusing on just a handful of customers, offering a super personalized experience.
Wow, like a concierge service for meal planning?
Pretty much. They did everything manually just to really understand those early users' needs.
That's dedication. What happened?
Well, by going above and beyond, they learned a ton. Then they were able to streamline things and scale to a much bigger audience.
So they proved their concept before trying to take over the world.
Yep. It's another example of how starting small and focusing on learning can pay off big time.
This ties back to what we were saying about MVPs, right?
Minimum viable products, absolutely. Get something out there, even if it's not perfect, start learning, start iterating.
Sometimes the MVP is you doing things manually, like in that food on the table example.
Exactly. It's all about validation. But then, what happens when things do start taking off?
That's when things get really interesting and also potentially more complicated.
Right. How do you maintain that startup energy and innovation as the company grows? You don't want to become that slow, bureaucratic monster.
I've seen that happen firsthand. So many good ideas die in those big companies.
Inspired tackles this head on. They call it the innovation versus execution dilemma.
Catchy name. But what's the solution? How do you balance those two things?
They suggest creating what they call islands of freedom within the organization.
Islands of freedom. Tell me more.
Think of them as mini startups within your company, small teams that have the autonomy to experiment and move fast.
Like their own little innovation labs.
Exactly. Inspired gives some good advice on how to set them up for success. Give them clear goals, the right skills, and the power to make decisions.
So it's about finding that balance between structure and freedom.
You need both. And the Lean Startup talks about this too, creating a platform for experimentation within your company.
So investing in the right tools, fostering that data-driven mindset.
And just as important, creating a culture where it's safe to take risks, to try new things, even if they fail.
It's about learning from those failures, sharing those learnings openly.
Exactly. So if we bring all of this back to you, our listener, building your venture, it's about more than just the product, isn't it?
It's about building a company, a culture, a system for continuous innovation, a company that's built to learn and adapt.
A company that embraces the principles of the Lean Startup, Inspired, and Sprint. And that's how you build not just a great product, but a truly great company.
That's a great way to put it. And remember, listeners, this journey of entrepreneurship isn't a sprint, it's a marathon.
There'll be ups and downs, challenges along the way.
But by applying the ideas we've talked about today, you'll be much better equipped to handle those challenges and ultimately achieve your goals.
So keep experimenting, keep learning, keep pushing forward.
And most importantly, have fun along the way. That's what it's all about.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.